Hello and welcome to the Joy of CX. My name is David Cox, and in this episode we're going to go through what it takes to really bring to life the essence of the differentiated branded customer experience that we constructed in the last episode. What's it really going to take to turn our vision into something that customers can genuinely feel and experience as they go through the journey with us? In the last episode, we talked a lot about the foundation that we were creating, understanding what our purpose is, what our principles are, what we want to be known for by our customers. And we also talked about the fact that it's very easy to get caught up and to believe that somehow just by having these things identified, they'll suddenly magically become a reality. I've seen lots of businesses that as soon as they've identified their customer principles and they've crafted their manifesto, that their first thought is then to go out and run a full-blown internal comms plan to really engage employees around it, to get people fired up, to get people as excited about the vision as the management team are themselves. But in my experience, this kind of flag waving usually falls on deaf ears. It's seen as a kind of academic exercise with no real substance, something that is not embedded, that has no grounding in the real world, and as a consequence can be more of a turn-off than an inspiring vision. So what is the route that we should be following? How do we go about driving real change, real transformation? How do we make our vision, our purpose, our principles a reality? So the first step here is to turn your high-level customer principles into a set of tangible commitments. These customer commitments capture the things that you as a business need to sign up to in order for customers to be able to see in you the principle that you want to deliver. We're aiming at a set of 4, 5 or 6 commitments for each principle that unpack the essence of the feeling that you're trying to deliver and become the rules of the game for you as a business. So for example, if you want to be seen as dependable, then maybe you need to commit to never making promises you can't keep. Or if you're standing by a principle of transparency, then maybe you need to commit to never using small print and so on. So we're trying to unpick our high-level principles and articulate clearly what we need to sign up to in order to make them real. The principles are like the dishes on the menu, and the commitments are the recipe for those dishes. They're the special sauce, the secret formula. And it's important to point out here that just like a recipe, they're not to be shared with customers. We're not talking here about the typical customer promise that you shout about on your website. They are an internal set of guidelines and aspirations, a vision of what you aspire to be, recognizing that you're almost certainly not there yet. Something to aim towards in order to become the ideal company of your customer vision. So you can't communicate them to customers because you'd be essentially shooting yourself in the foot from day one. Making a claim that you can't yet deliver on is the shortest and most effective route to the most unhappy of unhappy customers. So what is the most effective way of going about turning customer principles into customer commitments? In my experience, this only works if you involve the entire management team of the business, so they're fully signed up to the commitments they're making. It's very, very easy to write commitments on a slide and get everyone to nod approvingly, as they'll always sound good. But unless the management team of the business have some kind of skin in the game, they're never really going to stand by the commitments when the going gets tough. So what I normally recommend is to get the management team in some kind of off-site workshop, give them a bath in all of the data that we came up with in our 360 readout that we talked about in the last episode, and then get them to come up with the commitments that they think are key. As an example to try to bring it to life as to why this is so important, I've worked with quite a few businesses that end up somewhere in the territory of kind of playing fair as one of their core principles. We play fair, we treat customers with respect, that sort of thing. And if you're really going to be fair with your customers, you're probably going to have to sign up to some quite tough promises, or at the very least think very carefully about them. A classic example of this that really highlights why it's so important to involve the management team in this process is having to think about the question of, if we're really going to be fair with our customers, then maybe that means we can no longer offer beneficial acquisition offers to new customers, and that we should give our best offers only to our base. It's one of the classic complaints of customers. I've been with this company for 10 years and paying X amount per month, and new customers get to pay half what I pay. That's not fair. So if we're going to be seen as a business that plays fair, we're going to have to commit to never offering better deals to new customers than we give to our existing base. And that's a tough decision. It's a decision that requires very careful thought because it has huge financial implications, obviously. And more importantly, it requires a massive commitment on the part of the management team, because as soon as you sign up to that as a commitment, that's it. That means when things get tough and you're trying to hit your quarterly acquisition targets, that we can no longer give in and say, oh well, for this quarter we'll just do a quick half price offer to new customers. And that is where we really need to make sure that we are completely signed up. We understand that playing fair is absolutely the core of who we are, and we understand that in order to be seen as playing fair, we have to abide by these rules always, because as soon as you break one of your own commitments, the whole foundation crumbles. You've destroyed any trust that you built, and it'd be almost impossible for you to be seen as playing fair ever again. So it's absolutely critical to get the management team involved in discussing and thinking about what those commitments need to be and what the implications are going to be for the business. It's also important to be really honest with yourselves if you decide to back away from a particular commitment because you're concerned about the implications. Would customers really be able to see you as fair if you decide to continue to offer better deals for new customers? And therefore maybe you have to renounce fairness as a principle altogether. Customers respond to integrity, consistency and authenticity in their experience, and you should never make empty claims. So once you have your customer principles unpacked into commitments and your management team signed up in blood, how are you going to use this to drive change? First of all, at the simple level, the commitments become a kind of mental checklist to every business decision. They form a set of kind of pre-established rules that mean you no longer have to think about, debate, discuss the virtues of each decision. You can hold any decision up against your business plan guidelines on the one side and your customer guidelines on the other, so you can be sure you're always taking decisions that are aligned with your path. So that's on the kind of day-to-day basis, but much more importantly than that, what commitments also serve as is a kind of blueprint for the ideal experience that you need to start to create. They encapsulate the vision of the to-be experience that we need to deliver. So the next step is to embark on a process to reimagine, redesign, re-engineer our end-to-end customer journey. It's important to stress this isn't a case of finding ways to improve our existing experience. It's about stepping out of how things are today and coming up with the ideal journey based on our commitments. We're trying to work out what the journey for our customers would look like if we were to deliver on all of our commitments at all moments. So for example, if our commitment is to never make promises we can't keep, what should our marketing materials look like? What should salespeople say to customers? How should we schedule deliveries? How should complaints be handled? And so on. So what's the best way of undertaking this ideal journey design activity? The basic format I've used many times over the years is simply to run a one-day workshop for each of the 5, 6, 7 key moments in the customer journey to apply the commitments to that moment and come up with the ideal experience. The other thing I've learned is that it's really, really effective to use your own people to come up with the design. This isn't a job for the consultants, it's a job for our own people to get engaged, to create something organically. You're feeding them with the goal and challenging them to translate that goal into a reality for customers. And when you use a combination of frontline staff as well as some of the back office people from the engine room of the business, you really don't want to be using senior people here, I've never ceased to be amazed at the quality of the innovation and ideas that they can come up with. And it's for their business that they live and breathe every day. In terms of the mechanics of these workshops, they're essentially a brainstorm process that aims to describe the outcome for the customer rather than the internal business process. The challenge is to try to come up with the ideal scenario at a point in the foreseeable future. I usually suggest thinking about 3 to 4 years in the future, and to avoid being overly constrained by how things work today in the company and the sector and so on, or to be too constrained by technology either. You know, that typical, our systems would never be able to do that. We're trying to find that delicate balance between what's desirable and what's reasonably practical. We're not aiming for science fiction, but equally, we're not just trying to tinker with the current experience. The output of this brainstorm activity, guided by applying the commitments to each step in each journey moment, is a series of statements that articulate the ideal experience from the customer's perspective. We can call these design elements. Individual statements that capture the experience of customer. You know the sort of thing. We offer the ability to select a delivery window in half-hour slots directly in the app. We provide proactive recommendations to the customer on how to reduce their expenditure. We greet customers entering our store with a smile and try to greet all returning customers by name, and so on. And I know these things are not rocket science, but they are simply detailed expressions of our principles in a given moment. But once we've articulated 1,000 or so of these design elements across the end-to-end journey, we start to build a comprehensive picture of the ideal to-be experience, a blueprint of how our customers will be treated, driven by what matters to them and translated into real experiences at every step in the journey. There's a direct line of sight from our purpose through into our principles that we stand for, broken out into commitments, and then those commitments translated into individual experience statements of the ideal journey at every single moment. The issue here is that we now have so much content that it's almost as if we've created a technical manual. It's like we have the technical features of, say, an Aston Martin, horsepower, dashboard layout, seat design, and so on, but we're not transmitting the joyful experience of driving one, swooping through the bends on a mountain road. So we can technically build the experience, but we can't really transmit it internally and get our people fired up about it. So what I normally do from that is to take out the headlines of each of the moments in the journey, the key things that really stand out in terms of the design of the ideal experience, and craft that into a kind of customer story. We tell the story from the customer point of view of what they are going to experience as they go through the journey. And we're leaving out a lot of detail. We're just trying to capture the essence of each of the moments, the key standout things, the kind of thread that runs through it. I've been through this exercise many, many times, getting right down into the detail, what's going to happen at every moment, then summarizing it back up, crafting this customer story, and then playing that customer story back to the management team. And even though it can be a kind of cringeworthy experience reading the story back to the team, almost every time I do it, you can almost feel the smile growing and the excitement building. You get this kind of hell yeah moment where they can suddenly see the business that they want to be, that customers want them to be, the business they can be proud of again. I've had CEOs demand to have a copy on their desk at all times. I've had another sit back and simply say, that's customer experience. That's what's going to make us different. And it's interesting because normally speaking, the story contains nothing that's rocket science. We're not suddenly dreaming of robotics and AI. They're very, very simple things. Things that even at the management team level, they kind of intuitively know we should be doing. But just having it articulated, knowing that it comes from customers, knowing that it's grounded in all that research right back to what matters to customers, seeing it translated into a story that takes you through the customer journey from end to end, is that moment where this becomes something that's achievable, desirable, and special. And so it becomes something that everyone throughout the organization can really get behind. And it's been created completely organically. We haven't wheeled in the consultants to tell us what to do. We as a business have listened to our customers, we've thought about it, we've redesigned what we think we should be doing, and we've played that back to the management team. And suddenly we've got this holistic view of where we need to be as a business. And everybody's bought into it, both from the bottom up and the top down. Everybody's signed up because it's ours. This is our business. This is who we are, what we're going to deliver, and we believe in it. And that belief always translates into effective action, into desire to make it happen, into speed of delivery, commitment to delivery. So let's talk a little bit about that delivery process. Because again, all we've done now is created a blueprint. We haven't actually delivered anything. So we need to take our ideal journey blueprint and turn it into an executable plan. We need to turn it into a set of initiatives to deliver it. And we do this by applying an execution lens to the design elements that we created with the journey lens. So let's use an example to try and make this clear. As you go through the design exercise, you'll come up with lots of design elements that have, say, strong self-serve digital type elements to them. The customer's able to upgrade, downgrade directly from the app, or track deliveries through the app, or talk to the chatbot to make a complaint and so on. And what we do is we take all of those design elements from across the customer journey, from each moment in the journey, we pull them together and we create a self-serve initiative that takes all of those design elements and puts them together into a package that we can then give to our digital development team. The design elements become the basic user requirements for the self-serve initiative or program. Another key theme that often emerges is changing and aligning the way frontliners interact with customers at all the moments in the journey to embody the style you're trying to deliver. And this will often lead to a comprehensive soft skills retraining type of initiative. So we bring all these things together and we end up with a set of 10 to 12 executable initiatives that become our transformation roadmap, our path to delivering the ideal experience. We've got mapped out our path from the as-is experience that we're delivering to customers today through to the experience that will deliver on the principles and the purpose that we've defined. We know exactly how to get to the point where we're delivering that ideal experience to customers, safe in the knowledge that this is the experience that will make them fall in love with us, that will bind them to us forever. It's not worth spending time in this podcast on getting into the details of program management and delivery. That's a whole other topic, and there's more than enough material out there. But one thing I would say is that in my experience, what we typically end up with here is 2 to 3 years worth of full hardcore execution to finally deliver on the full scope of the ideal experience design. This isn't something you're going to deliver in 5 minutes, but equally, nor is it the typical never-ending program. The important thing here is to put in the work, get your head down and work through the delivery so that you can move ever closer to that fully differentiated, fully unique and valuable experience that none of your competition can emulate. It is a lot of hard work, I make no bones about that. In order to really transform the way you treat customers, you're going to have to dig up a lot of your drains and change a lot of things about your business. But one thing I would say though is that, again, from experience, very often the majority of things that you have to change are not always what you might expect. The big system development projects, the full digital transformation, the complete re-engineering of your business processes and so on. Very often, the majority of things that you need to change are actually to do with how you communicate with customers, what you say to them, how you talk to them, what you talk to them about. Most of the change comes in that realm of communication, and that's actually great news because changing the way you communicate with customers is cheap. It's not difficult to do, it's not expensive to do, and it can have far-reaching impact, but it doesn't require massive investment. And this is something that I've learned, that so often implementing the ideal customer journey doesn't actually cost the earth. So the cost-benefit ratio is massively skewed towards the upside. By changing the way you communicate with customers, you can get some of the biggest improvements in customer experience, which translates into massively improved acquisition, upsell capability, and loyalty. So the revenue upside of changing the way you communicate can be enormous, and the cost of doing it is relatively trivial. So I think we'll leave it there. We've put our house in order, we've cleaned up our act, we're building something that is truly exceptional, truly differentiated, truly unique, and we're well on our way to putting that into practice. We're embedding it into every single interaction that we have with our customers. And so in the next episode, we're going to go on to talk about the final stage, which is all about embedding a culture into the organization which is aligned with what we stand for in the marketplace, that will make sure that what we stand for is an authentic expression of who we are, of how we behave as our character as an organization. So many thanks for listening and hope to see you soon.